Good Sunday morning and welcome to Rochester in Focus. I'm Lynette Adams. Coming up on the show today, I'll introduce you to the authors of a new book. It's called Black Facts, an ultimate primer to the historical and the hysterical. I assure you, it's a history book unlike any you've ever read. Also coming up on the show, the Memorial Art Gallery's annual Black History Month program. 1 week from today, Annie Dukes will join us later to tell us what we can expect. But first, a book about African Americans in history, some who are still alive today. But authors Tim and Deb Smith didn't want to tell just any story. They wanted you to really get to know the subjects in the book. So they tell the stories a little differently. When you read the book, it may surprise you to meet the authors. Here we go. It's called Black Facts, an ultimate primer to the historical and the hysterical. What is interesting is when you read this book, you automatically assume that the authors are African American. But you are not. What inspired you to write this book about Black facts and do it in such a way that it is not only informative but entertaining?
We're both retired school teachers, so we have dealt with a cultural awareness that is very dear to our hearts.
A general thing that kind of guided us was just the attitude that, the more people know about each other, the more they're going to understand each other, the greater their ability to have compassion for one another. And, that was what kind of guided us through the entire thing. But, and this last one, well, the current one that just came out, when we started this, it was the sultry summer of 2020. It was in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing. And we'd be sitting here at our desk working on some project. The news would be on in the background. And it was just so discouraging to hear what was going on in the country. And we just looked at each other and said, we should do something, anything that could have a positive impact on what was going on in society. Oh, and at the time we were exploring some options in writing about the women's movement. And we had some funny stories, some historical stories in that regard, and we were trying to think about how to mesh it all together. And then when we started to apply the concept to this Black Facts project, we're out there researching, and it occurred to us, there's a whole bunch of books out there on Black history, and there are a whole bunch of books out there on Black humor, but never before had anybody attempted to take those two threads and feed them through the eye of a single needle. And that's what we did with this book, and we think that's why the response has just been so overwhelmingly positive to what we've done. It's just different than anything else that's ever been attempted. I loved the stories. Kevin Hart, of course, he's one of my favorites, and so I love the stories that you share from him. So it gives you a perspective of that person. They come alive in more ways than just the words about them.
We hear that a lot about our writing, whether it's paper or one of our books. They say it's like we're in the same room with you. You're like talking to us, like we're your audience right here.
Why did you think it was so important to tell the stories that way? The analogy is that when we did the comic thread of this, which we know people are going to be entertained by that, we wrote about 38 different Black comedians beginning in the late 1800s, going through the present. And as we researched this for well over a year, we had a database, and every time we came across something funny, we would enter in that base. And when it came time to pull everything together, what we essentially did was, went back, and for each of the people about whom we wrote, we went through, and of everything we had, we picked out 5 to 10 of the funniest things they ever said, which is what you're talking about having seen in the book. But the end result was what you have anthologized here is essentially here are the 500 funniest jokes and one-liners ever spoken by Black comedians through all of history. And they're all out there somewhere, but nobody else had ever pulled them all together in one specific entity like we have here. And that was our goal, to do something that would give people the opportunity to enjoy all of this stuff in one place. Was that your intention, to give people a different perspective of some of the
names and faces in history as well as people who are living today.
The more you know about where someone comes from, the more you understand. And that's important to both of us, very important. And we delved into these lives. It's just not the funniest jokes. We go into their lives and share. I mean, we talk about Bill Pickett, 1900 rodeo cowboy steer wrestler. Hilarious. I mean, great story that we write about his bio. But we incorporate different things about them. Here's an example. Now, he's a steer wrestler. He has this unique shtick where he jumps on the back of a bucking steer, finagles his body underneath it, and wraps his arms around the steer's neck, holding on for dear life. I mean, he draws people from all over the place. He's amazing, too. Then he ends up biting the steer on its lip. Now, steers do not like being bit there.
Oh, they hate that. That is the worst. If you're a steer, don't do that to me.
But just to have some fun with this thing, we incorporate limericks also into our writing. And we came up with a limerick written from the perspective of the steer. Can you explain a limerick?
And just in all of our books, one of the little motifs that we've done is we include poetry throughout. And when it comes to poetry, our typical weapon of choice has been the limerick. And English teacher, quick lit term review. The definition of a limerick is it is a 5-line poem where the first, second, and fifth lines rhyme, and the third and fourth lines rhyme. And they all have a rhythm to them, which if you were to vocalize it, comes out like da-da-da, 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 da-da-da.
So that being said, I would like to recite the limerick again, written from the perspective of the steer. While it's rarely my style to complain, that black cowboy is truly insane. There's his legs on my hip, then that bite on my lip, which I must say I truly disdain.
That's great. You know, I thought one thing I thought was really funny was when you told the story from a baby, Kevin Hart, when he was baptized. You know, I thought, when I read that, I thought that is probably exactly what a Kevin Hart would have thought and would even tell about himself. Tell me about the research that you did for each of the characters and how you chose to tell these particular stories.
One of the approaches that we took was that, like in the historical part, we wanted to look for some stories that were a little bit off the beaten path. I mean, if you look for the Black history stories, there's, high points, Obama elected, low points, King assassinated, and people know those stories already. So we did make a conscious effort to try to look for little nooks and crannies of, stories that they're great stories, but people, haven't heard them yet. So that was one of the approaches that we certainly used.
The organization of the book was interesting because when we were done researching, we had all these stories and we were like, how are we going to organize this thing? It was like a juggling act, and we had it all spread out all over the place. And then we decided to do something like a thematic, and we divided it up in just a few of them: gender, time period, sports, war, music, and there are more. But then we took and alternated the chapters between historical and hysterical. After we got done, we designed our own ebook, sent it out to hundreds of colleges, organizations, people wanting feedback, any type of feedback, negative, positive. What do you think before we get this book published? Overwhelmingly positive. And what Tim shared earlier, the comment that was repeated a lot is that there's nothing else out there like this book. And we even got things from people, every home needs this book. I couldn't put this book down. It's easy reading. It's just so fascinating, the research you did. And they love the timelines. People said, we never enjoyed timelines. Boy, did we love the timelines in this book.
Well, I'd like you to hear a little bit more about Tim and Deb's backstory, how they met, and how they came to write this book. More surprises you won't want to miss. Welcome back. We've been talking with Tim and Deb Smith, the Minden-based authors of Black Facts, an ultimate primer to the historical and the hysterical. The Smiths grew up in the Lima area, then separated. Their story is as interesting as their books.
you have a backstory. The two of you have come a long way since you were children when you first got to know each other, right?
Our backstory, it's kind of interesting. Going back in time, in 8th grade, Deb was a Lima Indian and I was a Honeywell Falls Hornet. And the merger of those two local school districts took place in between 8th and 9th grade for us. We met on the first day of high school in 9th grade, dated for all 4 years, ended up going to separate colleges and not seeing each other again literally for 40 years until my mom passed away back in 2013. Deb heard about it through the grapevine in Virginia Beach where she was teaching. She wrote me, I wrote her back. One thing led to another. And at the end of that school year for her, I went down to Virginia and grabbed her and brought her back home. And so now we're married and living happily ever after in beautiful downtown Mendon.
But Tim always leaves one part out. Every day I would go to the faculty room and get my mail. And there would be a letter from Tim that he had written, I had written to him 40 years ago. He saved them all.
Took me a long time to play those cards.
Wow. After 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, wow. It's really a romantic story. Very compelling. So fast forward to how you two started writing together.
We happen to live next door to the local newspaper office, the Mendon, Honeywell Falls, Lima Sentinel. And so we would see the owner and publisher in passing. Told him actually it started with a story that we initially shared with you. Told them that story about our background. And they said to us, you guys should write this up. We would put this in the paper. That was the first thing we wrote. That was back in 2015. We have been the entire back page of the local paper ever since. And so then within that realm, they said to us, you guys should write it. You're so good. You should write a book. You should write a book. But the book had to be like 40,000 words long. And, what we write for the paper every week, it's just kind of an eclectic variety of music, sports, travel, local history stuff. And, we needed something big to take and run with it. And, what that turned out to be was that it came up back in what would have been 2019. As that summer approached, it was just kind of strange. Historically, within a 30-day period, it was the 50th anniversaries of First Man on the Moon, Woodstock, Manson murders, and then also when we met. So there was like a sign from God, you guys got to pick one of these things and go with it. And what we ended up picking was the Manson thing, just because, it's not a pleasant story, but it was just like so intriguing and so bizarre, all of the elements of that. And the first book that we wrote that we had published is called The Beatles, the Bible, and Manson. And it was just about the crazy summer of 1969. And, that was what got us started.
Well, first of all, it was supposed to be like a 2-week article. And then all of a sudden we got so involved, and that's our passion. We love to research. We're just those kind of geeks. We give us something and we don't know about it, we're out there. I had my mother's King James Bible. We had the Beatles' White Album here because that's what Manson used when he spoke to his family.
Did you worry about capturing not only the essence but the facts and retelling the story in a way that it would be respectful? Did you worry about criticism of that?
One thing that we did was we sent our draft of this to every HBCU, historically black college and university in the country. There's about 100 of them, and you can get their contact information online. Sent it to all of them to get feedback in terms of just how this approach would be taken. And one of the things when we shared our writing is that like our style is just, it seemed to suit the topic. We have kind of an irreverent sense of humor that we incorporate, and we felt that we could do a good job with this. We felt it would be something that would be appreciated by people of every race. We felt great about how it turned out, and the response that we've gotten, and if you look at the book, there's a lot of kind of like the foreword and a lot of what other people are saying about this thing were comments that we got from different black people. And we feel like all of that feedback validated our approach, and you know, we just think that this is something that everyone can enjoy, regardless of race, religion,
But
whatever.
our thought was always respectful, respecting others. And that was our approach to this whole book. That this is a positive, respectful, encompassing book.
So what's next for you guys?
Well, we're writing about the women movement, the women's movement. Pretty much the same layout with the hysterical, and that's where we were. We did a huge, I don't remember how many weeks, at Seneca Falls, we would visit there often. Met with the president of the Women's Association there.
It's Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and while it was being built, redesigned across the waterway. It's just something that's very much on our heart too. So that'll probably be the next book. We're in the middle of it, and we were in the middle of it when this whole thing came to surface, and we knew we could make a difference with this book. And that was the bottom line. We knew it. We said, we can do something. We can make a difference. If people get this book and they read it and they go, wow. I mean, especially, we have this person we read about, Onesimus. I don't know if you read about him yet, but he was a slave from sub-Saharan Africa who came up with a vaccine. Who in the world would know about that? But
First vaccine ever administered in what is now the United States was done under his direction.
And we read about him and Jack Johnson. These people that others don't know about, some of them.
But going back to the topic of the next book, it was kind of interesting that, like, the black book leapfrogged the women's book, and we're kind of thinking that one could play upon the other because the black one has been done for months now. The women's one, we're modeling it in terms of the same format, weaving those two threads of the historical and the hysterical, through one needle, as we said before, and just thinking that maybe the success of one will play off on the other. But it was, we were halfway through the women's thing, and then it got put totally on the back burner for over a year because we got so involved with trying to, write this anthology of the Black story.
And you can find Black Facts, an ultimate primer to the historical and the hysterical, on Amazon Books and at Barnes & Noble.